Good morning, jury members. I'm Jia-Hao. Thank you for taking the time to be here today, where I'll be presenting to you my final design project titled Invitation to Love. Before I do so, I'll do a very brief introduction of who I am and my background, the inspiration for my memoir, the designer's question that I've chosen from the development of the memoir, as well as finally the invitation to love that I've been working on the past few months. So, I'm Singaporean. I was born in Singapore, where I studied architecture at the National University of Singapore, and after graduating with my degree, I decided to fulfill my childhood dream of becoming a cabin crew with Singapore Airlines. And I flew for 3 years, where I had the opportunity to experience and explore cities all over the world. And I also took this time to think about what I wanted to do as a designer. That is why I decided to join the program for design for smart cities at Strate, because I wanted to change the way we design cities, and also wanted to experience the open and more democratic culture of design in France. So I'm a designer for smart cities. What does that mean? It means that I design spaces, experiences, and services for cities for the benefit of its residents. To me, smart cities are human-centered, inclusive, sensible, finally they are democratic. This notion of smart cities led me to question how can we better share the benefits of city living with its residents in a more equitable way. So the title of my memoir is How Pleasure Can Strengthen Equality. I was concerned with the idea that if we all take equality as being beneficial for everyone, and everyone desires well-being in their lives, and this desire for well-being powers our actions and the choices that we make, and in doing so, when we take this action, it's fulfilled well, we fulfill our desires, we experience pleasure. How then can this pleasure be used to strengthen equality for everyone? The main conclusion from the memoir is that too often people conflate well-being with pleasure. And so by experiencing a lot of pleasure that is felt by the human body, ownership of pleasure-giving objects, as well as consuming pleasure that is temporary, so you keep consuming time and time again, people conflate this with living well. However, if we are truly concerned with living good lives, what we should be concerned with is expanding this notion of pleasure to include the wellness of our mental health, our long-term wellness, the wellness of the communities and societies we live in, the wellness of our environments, and the well-being of our future generations. So, in expanding this definition of pleasure, the argument I made is that it allows us to make better, more intelligent choices with more equalizing consequences. And therefore, this will also enhance the pleasure that we experience, and it strengthens equality. So, my design's question has to do with how then can we make sure that individuals who already know and are working with this expanded definition of pleasure, how can we support them? Because their well-being and their actions thus have a direct relationship to how well we achieve equality in the future. But this future can be hard to envision, especially in the face of overwhelming evidence of inequality in our everyday lives. My question is, how can I as a designer motivate and sustain individuals in generating equality in their everyday lives? In asking this question, what I'm concerned with is, how can I as a designer give these individuals motivation and hope to continue doing what they're doing and to improve their stamina over the longer run? And how can I as a designer provide an intervention that is accessible to them in their everyday lives that they don't have to spend a lot of time or money in order to access? So from there I began my research and observation. When we're talking about equality and its relationship with the city, we're talking about spatial equity, which is defined by individual access to public space, equitable share of collective resources, economic developments, and finally, accessibility and inclusion as immutable human rights. Why are we asking this question today? This is because our cities are so important in human development because they bring together and concentrate a lot of social and economic benefits. Therefore, the health of our cities directly affect the health of people living in the cities and people who are not living in cities. The way we live today in our cities is the blueprint for our tomorrow. And this is important because the UN estimates that in 2050, 2/3 of the world's global population will be living in cities. Therefore, how accessible, how inclusive our cities are directly affects the resilience of mankind and our cities, especially in the face of climate change. So, I began my research by cataloging the different types of inequality that are taking place in Paris today. And
just try to hide this.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, how equal are things in Paris? If you look at the distribution of homes and spaces in Paris, we can see that Paris is much denser in the right side of the city based on this average number of people per room, which means that there are many more people per kilometer square in that part of the city. At the same time, access to green spaces and cultural facilities and activities is also not equally distributed throughout the city. In my research, I also found that inequality is intersectional. It means that different forms of inequality often contribute to other forms of inequality, and individuals often experience more than one form of inequality. And I was especially inspired to look at LGBTQ inequality in Paris because even though France is one of the leaders in equality and democracy in the world, it lags behind its Western European neighbors in terms of LGBT inequality. In fact, anti-LGBT crime has been on the rise since 2017. More than half of these crimes result in physical harm or injury to its victims, and 13% of these crimes take place in public space. So now we need to ask, what is it about public space in Paris that somehow causes this type of harm to other people? I found this research paper written in 2010 where heterosexuals were surveyed on their perception of how comfortable gay and lesbian Parisians are in Paris. And you can see that this is in stark contrast to the data surveyed from gay and lesbian Parisians themselves. Gay and lesbian Parisians tend to be most comfortable in Le Marais, which is in the center, and as we move towards the fringe of the city, this comfort level drops. I wanted to see if this data still holds true 10 years later today, and so I conducted a research survey that was online and took about 28 questions, so it would take about 10 minutes, and 4 video interviews with 4 Parisians. There were 42 respondents to my survey, more than half of whom identify as female, and more than half of whom identify as members of the LGBTQ community in Paris. For the interview, I interviewed 4 men who either identify as gay or queer, and who spend time creating equality through their own individual ways. One of them is an ex-SOS homophobia volunteer, and I also found 2 tour guides who have a lot of experience giving tours related to LGBTQ history and information in Paris. So, from my research and my interview, where are LGBTQ people most comfortable in Paris? It is in agreement with the research paper earlier that they are most comfortable in the center of Paris, especially in the 1st and 4th arrondissement. Conversely, they are the least comfortable in the 16th, 18th, 19th, and 20th arrondissement, with the 18th arrondissement being the arrondissement where they feel the least comfortable. And this was a sentiment shared by all 4 of the interviewees as well. At the same time, it is interesting that from my survey I found that people who have witnessed anti-LGBT bullying and crimes, these were in the inner arrondissements where they supposedly felt the most safe and comfortable. So then this brings about the question, there is the reality of safety and the perception of safety. So why do they perceive that they are less safe in the other arrondissements?
Can you just to understand the number of people you interviewed? How many people?
42 respondents on the survey and 4 interviews.
Okay.
Yeah. So I decided to do an observation of the urban experience in Le Marais where they feel the most comfortable, and in the 18th. And I found that in Le Marais, the urban experience tends to be more comfortable because the sidewalks are larger, the space is better maintained, the relative presence of urban furniture in Le Marais as compared to the 18th also meant that people occupying public space in Le Marais, they tend to organize themselves around this urban furniture. So some examples are benches, lampposts, even dustbins, and visual markers on the floor. So this makes visible the often invisible logic of urban furniture, so that passers-by who are walking through these spaces, they are somehow able to read the space and make their way through it comfortably. There are also parklets in Le Marais which makes for welcoming spaces for people to gather. At the same time, in the 18th, the urban experience is not as nice as in Le Marais because it is more poorly maintained. It is not as well maintained. The sidewalks are narrower and there are more competing groups of users. For example, we have people who are selling goods on the streets, competing for space with pedestrians, people who are queuing to enter shops, and finally, vehicles parked next to the sidewalk. Because I observe that because it's not as well maintained, the vehicles, they tend to encroach on the sidewalk space. At the same time, because there are lesser urban furniture in the 18th arrondissement in general, the people who gather there, who tend to be men in my observation, large groups of men, they organize themselves laterally according to what is already there. So we're talking about the sides of buildings and railings. And this creates an uncomfortable experience for other users in that same space. So this is essentially a question of people watching, but what kind of people watching makes other people feel safe? This kind or this kind that is more prevalent in the 18th. But what I found was that LGBTQ people in France, or at least in Paris, they identify themselves as French first, and their LGBTQ identity becomes second, third, or fourth. It's not the most important thing about themselves. And so they just want to be able to live their lives safely and comfortably. They do not feel they need to be treated differently from other people. And finally, they self-report high levels of self-consciousness, which means that when they're in public, they're paying a lot of attention to how other people in that same space are behaving, and they change their behavior, they police their behavior in order to draw less attention to themselves and protect themselves. I also wanted to find out how do they find the motivation to continue doing what they do as LGBTQ people to make things better for everyone else. A lot of them spend time with family and friends, spend time educating themselves, or enjoying moments of solitude. And these three most common methods correspond to the three basic psychological needs identified by Ryan and Deci as part of the self-determination theory. Agency, connectedness, joy, and hope are three basic psychological needs that people need in order to find motivation. So now, these needs inform the stakes of my project, which is how can we introduce love into the urban space, allow people to experience these needs in urban space in order to find the motivation that they need to do what they do. And so this is an invitation to love in the city. Coming back to this graph where people feel the least comfortable in these areas, I decided to site my project in the 18th arrondissement. And there are two sides to the 18th arrondissement. Montmartre, which is better known, better maintained, has a nicer experience as compared to La Chapelle. This is the southern part of La Chapelle neighborhood, which sits near the border between the 18th and the 10th. And I finally decided to site my project over here at Rue Philippe de Girard, which is in between the La Chapelle metro station and the Marx d'Ormois metro station. I identified the urban commons to which people have free access to. So these are mainly the parks and community gardens. And at the same time, I found that there's this new space called Rues aux Écoles, which are roads which are located immediately next to schools, École Primaire and École Maternelle, that have increased in number since the start of the pandemic. So this is the site that I've chosen. The school is École Élémentaire Philippe de Girard, and it is surrounded on both sides by restaurants. So this is the Rue à l'École, which was put in place since September 2020. It's about 65 meters in length, 16 meters at the northern end, 5 meters on the southern end. These are the pedestrian walkways in and around the sites. And you can see that they introduce pedestrian signs on the walkway on the road to make it pedestrian. These are the demarcated bicycle lanes around the site. What this means is that the road itself is not designed to be a bicycle lane. So there's no sign that it's a bicycle lane. But a lot of cyclists, they will come on the demarcated bicycle lanes and they'll cut through the site because the gates have a gap in the middle in order to get to the other side of the site. So essentially, the road is not very usable by pedestrians. This is a panorama of the site as it is. This is the school. And you can see opposite to it are mostly residential buildings. It is also quite bare. There's only one tree on site. And the urban furniture that were put in place originally, because this road was for cars, have not been removed. So the traffic light still stands, but it doesn't really do anything. So to illuminate the pain points of the experience on site right now, I developed 3 user personas based on my research and interviews. The first is Alex, who lives in this neighborhood. He identifies as queer, and he expresses his identity through his dressing and his style. He does not identify with Le Marais as a gay village. He says that Le Marais as a gay village is something that is historical, but it's not true in the present. And he just wants a safe place for himself and his group of friends to spend time in the city. And to him, a safe space is safe for everyone, not just some selected groups of people. So his journey on site, as he cuts through the site, he will find that because of the railing here that has not been removed, he has to walk around the railing. He cannot just cut across the road here. And when he does so, he will encounter a lot of groups of men who gather on the street corners, who gather along the railing and along the posts here, which is something that I observed on site. And because he has a higher level of self-consciousness, he feels that his identity is a little bit more visible to other people. He might feel a little bit less safe. So he feels uncomfortable, and then if he decides to cut across the road, he will encounter the cyclist and have to keep an eye out on both sides. So it's unsafe for him. And if he runs into his friend along the way, he will find that there's no place for them to sit and rest and socialize. The second persona is Maureen, who is an expert mother working from home, living in the neighborhood. She enjoys cycling in the city, especially when the number of cycling lanes have increased since the pandemic, and she always looks forward to spending time with her child. And for her, a safe space is where her only concern is making sure that her child has fun. So she cycles to site to drop off her kid, and the thing is she will have to walk over to this bicycle parking space there to park her bike before crossing the road with her kid. And at the same time, again, she has to watch out for cyclists coming from both sides. When she's waiting to pick up her child, she'll find there's no place to sit or rest. And if her child wants to play with his friends after school, they will have to move to a playground off-site, which might not be convenient for everyone. The third persona is Julia, who lives next to the site. She's a feminist writer, and she enjoys exploring the city and finding out historical information about these different spaces. She often spends time alone in the city reading a book, and for her, a safe space is where she can enjoy being with her own thoughts. So as she journeys onto the site, she discovers that, oh, this used to be the location of a messagerie de Gare de l'Est, and she finds it very interesting. Similar to Alex, as she walks to the site, she will encounter groups of men gathered on the street corners. As she crosses the road, she will have to deal with cyclists. And when she's there, she finds that, again, there's no place for sitting, but at the same time, the site is highly exposed and unsheltered. So this is a summary of the pain points common to the different users. So how then can I design an inclusive urban oasis on this site? I've identified 3 spaces that will help people experience the 3 psychological needs that they have in order to find motivation. And this is a system for adapting this proposal to the 122 rules of Ecole all around Paris right now, 57 of which alone were added during the pandemic. So this is the school, and 2.4 meters of pedestrian walkway will be reserved all around the site. 2.4 meters is considered the universal accessibility guideline, which will allow 2 pedestrians and 1 wheelchair user to share the sidewalk comfortably. Because the road we no longer need it to be very wide for cars. We can extend the sidewalk and at the same time create a 3.6 meter wide dual direction bicycle lane. And the border between the bicycle lane and the sidewalks will come in the form of a 1 meter wide green border, which can be used by the neighborhood as community gardens. At the same time, to prioritize the safety and comfort of pedestrians, I've introduced raised pedestrian crossings across the bicycle lane. And so, a space of play will be located opposite to the school, and then depending on the distribution of the spaces around the school, for example, if more people are gathered here, if there are more social functions such as restaurants and bars on this side of the school, the space for socializing will be placed there, and where it is quieter, the space of solitude will be placed there. So finally, this is how the project looks like on site. We have the space for socializing, space for play, space of solitude. The design of each space is based on proxemics in order to create an intimate and personal experience based on the human dimensions. So solitude is linked to personal space, which we perceive as being 1.2 meters around us. Socializing is what we perceive as being 3.6 meters around us. And finally, play, I take it as the space between the negotiation of our personal space and the negotiation of our social space. And from there, I chose a form that is reminiscent of a portal, a door, that is inviting to people, that welcomes them into the space. By repeating the form in a circular manner, I want to provide a sort of like structure that they can then enter and be surrounded by the experience that I'm creating for them. So the solitude space is equipped with a hammock in order to provide a flexible range of options for seating or lying down. And then colorful streamers are erected on the structure, provide this experience of changing levels of visibility and being hidden as the wind blows across the sides. For play, the structure remains open, it is a little bit wider, and this is designed based on the principles of directionless play, which means that the play structure does not dictate to the children how to use that space. Instead, it is up to them to interpret how they can play with the structure and to do so according to their imagination. And I've also included seating so that caretakers can remain physically close to the children in order to keep an eye on them and keep them safe. Finally, in the socializing space, the circular form prompts users gathered in that space to always look towards each other, to look inside the structure, and this directs their gaze away from public space, which is space that people perceive to be beyond the 3.6 meters around them. So how does this proposal improve the journeys of our users? So for Alex, as he approaches the site, he will notice that the raised pedestrian crossing prompts cyclists to slow down in order for pedestrians to cross. As he approaches the street corner, he will notice that the men who gather there, they are now using the social structure space, and their gazes are directed away from the public space of the street. So he feels a little bit more comfortable, and the colorfulness of the structure varies from structure to structure. These colors are based on the diverse cultures and identities on site. So for example, if someone has chosen, the neighborhood has chosen to decorate one structure in rainbow colors, it is ambiguous enough for someone like Alex, who is queer, to appropriate this space and interpret this rainbow color as being a queer space. And so he can appropriate this space for the duration of, let's say, a pride party that he's organizing with his friends in the neighborhood, and use it for that duration for himself. It is his safe space. So he will find that he has a comfortable experience now, his identity is represented in a sensitive way, and he can use public space for his own needs. For Maureen, she'll see that there's now a safer cyclist experience. They will slow down for pedestrians. If she wants to park her bike, there are parking structures located on both ends of the sites. If she doesn't, she'll find a cyclist-friendly waiting bay near the entrance of the school with a cyclist-friendly railing. When she's picking up her child, there's still a railing here because French laws dictate that vehicles cannot be parked in front of main entrances. So I've retained the railing, but at the same time, I've added some seating further away for parents. And if she wants to go to the playground with her child, it will be, again, a very safe and comfortable experience. And there are a lot of seating so that she can spend time with her child while also socializing with other caretakers. And the surface of the play structure is thermochromatic, which reacts to the heat of the body. And I think this will be a very interesting feature, especially for children, who will be able to explore creating art and other images with their own bodies. So she's now able to cycle to school safely and comfortably, spend time with her child, and socialize with other caretakers. Finally, for Julia, similar to Alex, she'll find that the experience walking the site is more comfortable because people are no longer gathered and looking in the direction of public space. As she approaches the space of solitude, she'll find that it's very quiet, it's in a very nice and green area. And she will find interesting, thought-provoking questions about identity and self engraved on the reflective surfaces. And she will also hear soft whisperings from audio recordings of people sharing their identities. And so, she will be inspired to share her own story and identity thanks to this space. And she can just tap her phone on the NFC chip embedded in the structure. As she leaves, she notices that there are names engraved on the parking structure as well. These are names that people in the neighborhood have chosen to engrave to memorialize or commemorate people that they are proud of. So she enjoys the solitude in comfort and safety in public, and inspired by the sharing of stories, the richness of the diversity of the community around her, she feels less alone. There's another layer to the project, which is this idea of co-creation with the community. The structures they are very simple forms, so we can use modular aluminum poles that can be welded together, and then technical fabric can be used to weave the seating surfaces. This provides the neighborhood with an opportunity to co-create this space together. I imagine that adults can organize workshops to put the structures together, and at the same time, the weaving of the surfaces can be done by children at the school or young people in the neighborhood. They can learn about different cultures and identities, about flags, colors, and use this opportunity to weave something together that is functional, that gives the structure its spirit of use. And finally, the green spaces can be used by residents in the area as community gardens. They simply need to adopt a plot and apply for a permit in order to do so. So, in the short term, this materialization could take place over 3 to 4 weekends. The neighborhood can also decide to fundraise for paint and material, for example, food for the workshops, and at the same time allow donors to engrave names and start collecting audio recordings about the diversity of identities and cultures. In the medium term, the maintenance of this oasis is contributed to by individuals in the community who have the permis de végétaliser, and in the long term, all this form the long-term memory associated with this oasis. The benefits of this space, besides having an inclusive and open space for adults, for children, right now there are 122 rules Ecole, so this could potentially impact 23,000 students who will now have safe access to a playground right opposite their school. And my choice of site is validated by the fact that 1 month after I started working on this site, the CRUE de Paris, they also started a similar project to transform this site, which shows that the city of Paris is aware that now these rules Ecole all over Paris, there are spaces for potential change. And so, the relationships have been reconfigured. The city as it is right now is a design object which reflects the needs that have been chosen, prioritized, and shaped accordingly for the needs of certain users, not all, which has created a lack of safety, exclusion, discomfort for some people, and which also results in harm for some of them. On the other hand, in my proposal, I started by expanding the pool of users whom I'm going to include and consider, and also the modalities of mobility that impact more people at one go. To identify needs that are common to every human, to design an experience that will include everyone. It is accessible to everyone and celebrates everyone's identity. And the design of the different furniture reflects this experience. And finally, these objects help people who already live with this expanded definition of pleasure to feel motivated and to continue doing what they do, and to feel the love that comes from knowing that you're doing something good for yourself, for your society. And with love, love begets love, they're able to give more love and do more to create greater equality for everyone. So, in designing this truly accessible urban commons that celebrates everyone, it expands what is possible in terms of personal identity, in the experience of the city, the way we love and see one another, and our city itself. We need to introduce and bring love into the city, make it a loving space, so that we know how to love each other, and this is also a way for us to love ourselves. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. So we have 20 minutes of questions or 15 minutes?
Yeah. 15 minutes maybe.
Okay. So, who wants to start?
Don't let me stop.
Can I start?
Oh, yeah, sure. Sure.
Thank you very much for this presentation. Our methodology was very clear. I have one question. Can you think about interaction with the neighborhood? Because we organize such, diversity of activities probably will generate, a different kind of experience also for the neighborhood.
Yes. So I chose functions such as socializing and play that already happen on sites, especially because we're talking about roads that are located right next to or in front of schools. So firstly, I prioritize the safety of children, and in my experience, children are going to run on streets anyway. So I decided that it is important to place a play space there. And also, from my observations, most of the time it's men, but people in general already gather in these roads, and this can create an uncomfortable experience for other people. And so I felt that I'm not going to prohibit people from socializing on the street, because that goes against the principles of inclusion and accessibility. Especially in these times, it is important that people have a space in public to go to, especially in areas like the 18th, 19th, and 20th, where we see that there are more people on average per room. And also because they are underemployed, they spend a lot of time on the streets. And this is not really something that I want to prevent them from enjoying. This is something that they need for their own well-being as well. So I decided to create a space that is well demarcated, that prompts people who want to socialize on the street to do so in a considerate and comfortable way for other users in the streets. Even if these users are just passers-by walking through the street, they still deserve a comfortable and safe experience. I think in this case, people want to socialize on the street, and people who are just walking past the street, they have equitable levels of safety and comfort. I think an aspect of your question is also how will it impact the neighborhood around. That is why I also included this idea of weaving the play surfaces, because in this act of weaving, the neighborhood is prompted to have conversations with each other about which communities, which cultures and identities they want to represent with the colors, with the weaving, the style of weaving, and this feeling that they are contributing to it, that they have a part to play in it, it makes it easier for them to accept it when, for example, someone decides to have a party in the street one night and create noise for other people. But there's this feeling like, okay, this is a space that I helped create, that I helped contribute to, and that I still contribute to its maintenance. This is its purpose. I'm not denying that there can be some disruption, but what I'm saying is that now people are a little bit more aware of other users. They make space for that to happen. They accept it for that period of time. Does that answer your question?
Kind of, yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
In terms of neighborhood, I was more thinking about, we have one
Oh yeah, so that is why I place the spaces of solitude on the side of the street where there are more residential buildings.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I have a question. I think you perfectly use the toolbox you have, interviewing, observing, and all those tools. But I think one part is missing is probably who is best in class in the world introducing love in the city. Do you know any success stories in that? And also you just work on Paris, but maybe you can help us to understand what happened in Singapore too, and how we can see the cultural impact on the acceptance of this kind of proposal.
Okay. So to answer your first question, who are the ones around the world who are creating this kind of lovely urban spaces? In my experience,
who introduce love in the city?
Okay.
I have a question. Yeah.
Love in the city.
If you that.
Okay.
No,
I think it takes different forms. In terms of urban design, the experience of public spaces that are welcoming to everyone, first one that comes to mind is Jan Gehl, the Danish designer. So he runs his own studio, and he produces reports every year about cities around the world that are very livable. And his definitions for livable are not driven by ideas like technology, that is high tech, so it is a good city. No. He provides guidelines such as spaces that include and welcome low mobility users like cyclists and scooterists and pedestrians. Another person who comes to mind is Bjarke Ingels, another Danish architect. So with his firm Big, he created an urban space in Copenhagen. I forgot the name, I'm sorry. But basically, it is in a lower income neighborhood of Copenhagen with a lot of migrant communities. So he actually designed this space to reflect all these different cultures and identities, and it was one inspiration for the project. So for example, there's a big Middle Eastern community in that neighborhood, and what he did was that he had fountains or structures that are from these cultures placed in the neighborhood itself. And so if you know Copenhagen, the architecture, the space is kind of like Paris, it's quite uniform. So when you enter that space, it is a very interesting contrast between all these foreign structures as compared to the Copenhagen architecture around it. And then the other question is about this comparison between Singapore and Paris.
And the impact of cultural.
Okay, so in Singapore, one reason why I chose not to practice design and architecture in Singapore is because it is very authoritarian. It is very top-down. It is very state-driven. And there's a lot of administrative work that is involved if you want to do something with urban design. Okay, and this idea of including the needs of residents and users is in its junior stage over there, because at the end of the day, it's going to be overridden by what the authorities decide is more important for the urban language of Singapore as a whole. Another thing is that we know that protests are not allowed in Singapore. Okay, so for the LGBT community in Singapore, there's no place for them to demand equal rights. So right now, being gay is illegal in Singapore. So what the LGBTQ community did is that there's a space in Singapore, a very specific space in the center, that the government says you can protest here, but you need to apply for a license with the police. And so there's this group called Pink Dot, which every year in June, they stage a protest, but it's very inclusive, very accessible. It's not about going there and being like, we're gay, we want rights. It's about everyone coming together to form literally a pink dot. So sometimes people hold big pink placards, Other years, when it takes place at night, they put pink cellophane on their phones so that when they turn on the light, it's pink. And then this is the image, this is the protest. So this is the Singaporean form of protest. But at the same time, you see that it restricts the right to the city. The city in Singapore is so dictated by the state that even one person standing in the street holding one sign can be charged with a one-person protest. And so this is the mindset that I'm coming with, that things are better in Paris. But how can we make these streets, these public spaces, more inclusive of everyone? Because everyone deserves it. Not just some people who feel like they deserve to stay in the street and then they do not care about the safety and comfort of other people. You know, like difference exists, but we need to make space for these differences and recognize that differences make our cities more resilient. This is why our cities are the cities that we live in. Yeah.
I just continue with one short private question linked to the rules.
Okay.
We also have rules in France.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not possible to do whatever you want in front of schools.
Yes.
For example, you cannot have a cafe near school. It's forbidden.
Okay.
So, do you know those rules? Did you check that it was possible to put this kind of furniture in front of a school?
Okay. So I found out that vehicles are not allowed to be parked in front of schools because of an attack many years ago. And this question about having cafes or whatever inside the school, in front of the school, is I deal with it by retaining the railing in front of the school, so that these kind of things cannot happen. I do not provide. I can show you the design again. I do not provide any seating directly in front of the entrance of the school. I only provide a railing which already exists. But I designed the railing in such a way. Right now the railing is straight. It's like straight and black. But I've changed it to be a little bit curved because I wanted to play with this idea that the curves also prompt people to kind of like, if they're leaning on it, they are forced to kind of face each other a little bit more. So that at the same time, pedestrians walking here also have a more comfortable experience.
It's curved like that.
Yeah, like
For people
curved.
to-
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And of course, like, not everyone can afford to stand all the time. So I just put some seating, but it's towards the other side of the space.
I understand.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have a question. So I like the fact that you were trying to interview people to understand better their usage of this space. And I was wondering if you also try to interview this group of men that you're talking about, that they are all like together because they're also using this space, and maybe they are the ones that are there most of the time actually. So did you try to like see how they're thinking of that space, what it represents for them? And
I did not speak to them, partly because my French is not very good. And but I did consider why they might be gathering in these spaces. From my primary observation before I did the research, it was because they had nothing better to do. Like, they just thought they had nothing better to do. They just want to stay in the streets. But after that, I spoke, thanks to my interview and research on open data Paris. And then based on my interviews with the 4 interviewees, who also, they pointed out precisely, La Chapelle has a lot of men in the streets. And these men tend to be from cultures that are not as accepting of queer identities. And then from my research on urban experience in other cities with similar cases, the problem is that it's not really that they want to stay in the street. It is that they are underemployed in French society, for example. So, and again, this is reflected in the data. There are more people living in these rooms, in these neighborhoods. And if you are underemployed, you do not want to stay at home all day, naturally, where can you afford to go? The streets. And so, to me, it was important to not brush aside the need for the street. And so I decided, okay, let's be inclusive of them. Let's create a space for them to socialize. I'm not going to say you cannot socialize in this space because it's uncomfortable for other people. But let's do it in a way that's considerate of other users as well, and that it's enjoyable for you. And that is why I was also inspired to introduce this idea of using different colors for the weaving, because the idea is that in implementing this proposal, we start talking to these people who are using the spaces. So you'll find that they're probably from other cultures. Which colors represent these cultures? Let's put it there, so that they have something to identify with as well. It doesn't feel like, oh, it's all just like Parisian. Maybe they do not see themselves as Parisian, but now they see an aspect of their culture and identities in this space. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Also, what made me think of it is that your memoir was about like capitalism and inequality more on the social level. So this is one big inequality that I see between like those people that are from the lower social class, maybe compared to the ones that you interviewed that are maybe representing a higher social class. So it's also conflict and inequality that I think it's a bit hard to make them like love each other and bond together. And
definitely. But you know, I think the idea of diversity and acceptance is not just that you, an aspect of it is that you tolerate it, but tolerance sometimes is not enough. You have to make it safe for those who are being tolerated. And I think this goes for these men who are underemployed, who are suffering from inequality of capitalism, and also people who do not feel as safe in public space in general because of their queer identities.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very close of the remarks I will do. Yes, I'm quite uncomfortable with the fact that you don't bring those people that you just tell, because it's about inclusivity and equity, and you don't really put together those people. And there is a clue very interesting in your presentation when you asked about the 4 people you interviewed. They said that they were queer or LGBT+, not as the first, they are first French or first architect or first something. So I think it would have been interesting to put in a park, because it's kind of park.
It is.
What brings those people together? What makes them less different than they think? Because when you study what conclude to fight to believe to something like that is especially ignorance of the other one. As much as those people in the streets have ignorance of themselves, because they are not French natives, or maybe from the labor class, also they are excluded themselves. That's why they're here. And I think it would have been interesting to have an anonymous inclusivity. And maybe some places more that you do together, like gardening together, like finishing other sentence, and so. Maybe it needs some more people, not LGBT plus, to put in a park and just can't tell who's who. And that's equity, and because nobody is nobody, nobody is anybody, so it works. How many people does fit in the park?
Well, okay, so right now with this particular site, I would imagine it's about 30 to 50, because each structure can take about 8 persons. And so on this side, it will be about 30 to 50, but it is adaptable, which means that if the road is smaller somewhere else and we can only fit 1 or 2 social structures, then the number of people who can fit will be determined by the size of the road.
And last question, what kind of fabric did you intend to use?
I was thinking canvas. I actually found this material called iMesh. It is supposed to be environmentally friendly. The colors are supposed to be more durable than the usual fabric. And the use cases so far that they have had are for more for decorative elements. But I just basically emailed them and asked would this make sense? And they said that their tests so far have not been on furniture, but we imagine that if you weave the threads together, because it is quite a high-tech thread, the tests show that they are quite durable, they can withstand a lot of weight. If you weave it all together and then you weave those strands with other strands, depending on the weaving pattern that you use, it can create a very durable and strong surface that can support two people.
Okay.
Yeah, but I cannot, obviously I cannot guarantee that it will work, but this is what I managed to find and research. Yes.
Any more questions? Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.